Hello, this is chapter 5 of the Scum villain self-saving system. My word. We 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 got it there eventually. Anyways, um chapter 5 Bailu. The moment Sheng Chunghua had seen Moby Jun suddenly appear, he had accidentally let out a "what the fuck?" At the time, Shen Qingzhu hadn't heard him particularly clearly, so he hadn't paid it any mind. But afterwards, the more he'd thought about it, the more suspicious he'd grown. The one who masterminded the event, or the logistics of it, Sheng Qinghua, was subject to the irresistible pressure of the plot. Yet he hadn't released the Black Moon rhinoceros python that should have starred in numerous scenes. This was suspicious in itself, but if you considered the possibility that he failed to do this intentionally in order to hinder the development of the plot, to serve the tragedy of Lo Binghe's fall into the endless abyss at its root, it made sense. Sever. The two stared at each other, speechless, competing for most stunned. Digging plot holes and not filling them, Shen Qingzhu finally burst out. Foreshadowing gone to waste. Landmines all over the place. The writing style of an elementary schooler. If you're going to write a stallion novel, then write a proper stallion novel. Don't fool around writing Gwump. I'm also a victim here, Sheng Qinghua said slowly. At the end of the day, I'm still the author. Even if I didn't transmigrate into the protagonist, I should at least have transmigrated into the role of a system in itself, right? But all of a sudden, I try to plug in a cord, I get electrocuted, and the system assigns me a character at random, and I end up cannon fodder. Still better than me, Shen Qingzhu sneered. After you're exposed as a spy, Moby Jun kills you outright to silence you. At least it's a straightforward death. Don't you remember the state I'll be in after I get carved up by Lo Binghua? You only transmigrated here how many years ago? Sheng Qinghua countered. Right upon rebirth. You already had rank of a great master, right? I transmigrated into an infant. A childhood where I was destitute and miserable, and years as a disrespected outer disciple. Have you really gone through more than I have? This competition had no winner, because in the end, it was 6 of one, half of a dozen of the other. Sheng Qinghua sighed. I've actually met a reader. Must be fate. One of the 4 joys in life is meeting an old friend in a foreign place. What was your Zongdan ID? Maybe we were old acquaintances. Peerless cucumber, said Sheng Qingzhu. Sheng Qinghua thought it for a while. I vaguely remember you. Weren't you especially vicious in one of those threads that was demanding I castrate the villain? It was when the original Sheng Qingzhu wanted to do to Ning Ying Ying. At first, Sheng Qingzhu empathetically said nothing. I refuse to believe you only remember that one thing. Don't dwell on the past. More importantly, he had a resolution. Enough blathering. I wanted to have a real discussion with you today, because after the Immortal Alliance conference, I suddenly had an idea. Perhaps it can solve our shared problem. Sheng Qinghua froze. For real? You think joking about something like this is funny? Sheng Qingzhu asked. I'm talking about a guaranteed fix. As long as we keep it absolutely secret, we'll avoid any trouble. It all depends on you. Do you still remember creating a plant that only appears every 1,000 years? Sheng Qinghua was speechless. Your description is way too broad. Binky's eaten at least 80, if not 100 plants like that. So you know too. Sheng Qingzhu sighed, then spoke 4 words into Sheng Qinghua's ear. Sheng Qinghua listened, shocked. After a moment, he gave Sheng Qingzhu a deeply meaningful glance. What are you looking at? Asked Sheng Qingzhu. Nothing, Sheng Qinghua said. It's only long ago I began to suspect that Cucumber Bro was a faithful reader, just one that didn't like expressing his feelings in a normal way. To think you were able to recall an obscure throwaway plot point I only used once. I'm very moved. Sheng Qingzhu refused to respond to that. Tomorrow, leave the mountain with me. We'll go search out of its place of origin. Tomorrow? Isn't this a little too sudden? Sheng Qinghua stammered. Truthfully, I can't remember its exact location and description. The entire work was nearly 20 million words long, and it was only mentioned in a single paragraph. Let me think for a while. I'll tell you once I remember. Then take your time remembering until Lo Binghua murders his way back, with Mobijan under his command, said Chen Qingchu with the utmost sincerity. At the time, one will kill me and the other will kill you. I'm sure it won't be too late then either. All right, I'll definitely remember by tomorrow. Thankfully, on Onding Peak, trivial matters like assigning rooms and uniforms to newly accepted disciples didn't require the Peak Lord's involvement. Sheng Chenghua went back, and he thought long and hard the entire night, racking his brain, shifting and overturning the continents of his mind. Finally, before daybreak, an epiphany struck, and he circled a location on a map. Upon seeing the map, Shen Chengzhu slapped the table, then grabbed Sheng Chenghua and set off down the mountain. They spent part of the journey eating, part of it playing, traveled partly by sword and partly by carriage. All in all, it should have been quite pleasant. The only part that was a tiny bit unpleasant was that Sheng Chenghua moaned and groaned as he spat in the coachman's seat. Why am I the one paying for all the food and lodgings? He asked. Why, whenever we're taking a carriage, am I also the one driving? Don't you feel any shame? Shen Jingchu asked from inside the carriage. The funds are communal, provided by Zengman Shishong. All you're doing is taking them from your waist pouch. Sheng Qingchu's heart grew Sheng Qinghua's heart grew especially sour when he thought back on the words of instruction Yu Qingwan had given before they left. Sheng Shidi, for the journey's duration, Qingchu will be in your care. He's frail, so please watch over him. What's up with that? As the great author, great master airplane shooting towards the sky, who'd put all his portraying Sheng Qinghua as a lowly scum? He'd finally understood this character's pain. Logistics really got no respect. Everyone treated him like a nanny. Who wouldn't understand the original Sheng Qinghua's desire to climb the ranks by any means? It was all too sympathetic. You have hands and feet, said Sheng Qinghua. Why don't you use them, Fuck! Sheng Qingchu felt the carriage suddenly pitch forward, and Sheng Qinghua abruptly reined in the horse. He raised the curtain on the alert. What's wrong? The carriage was currently passing through a stretch of dense forest. All around them, ancient trees soared in the sky, while fallen leaves were scattered everywhere. Most of the sunlight was blocked by leaves upon layers of branches. On the ground, it was difficult to find even specks of light. Shen Chengchu saw nothing strange, but he didn't lower his guard. What were you screaming about? Sheng Qinghua was still panicked. Just now, I saw a woman on the ground, slithering by like a snake. If I hadn't stopped the carriage, I would have run her right over. This did sound rather eerie. That is indeed worth screaming over, said Shen Chengchu. The forest was still quiet. As of right now, nothing seemed off. Shen Chengchu didn't dare relax, though. Instead of getting back inside the carriage, he joined Sheng Qinghua in the driver's seat. Forming a sword seal with one hand, he observed their surroundings in silence, while his other hand pulled out a handful of melon seeds from the snack bag, which he shoved at Sheng Qinghua. Be good and go inside, eat and play. Sheng Qinghua could be ordered about and used for odd jobs, but when it came to fighting monsters, he was pretty much useless. He knew his own capabilities and obediently took the melon seeds and started eating. With every step of the horse took, he ate a seed. As such, after an incensed time, they finally realized a very serious problem. The two of them wordlessly looked at the ground and saw a trail of familiar melon seed holes. No doubt about it. Chengchong mountain sacks, Changchao Peak's dragon bone cantaloupe seeds are red in color with golden inside, said Sheng Qinghua. This is definitely the trail of seeds holes I left. I am aware that peddling melon seeds is one of your peak's side jobs. Enough. So here was the problem. How had they returned to their original location? The two of them stared at each other. They were going in circles, a classic and very tired scenario. Sheng Qinghua suggested an old folk remedy. How about we try sprinkling male virgin's pee into the horse's eyes? Horses have dignity too. Why sprinkle urine in its eye? Sheng Qingchu asked. And where am I supposed to find a male virgin pee out in the middle of nowhere? Once those words left his mouth, he then realized that Sheng Qinghua was gazing intently at him. Why are you looking at me? As for my former self, let's not talk about that now. You wrote Cheng Cheng Chu's original character yourself. He's unsullied without, degenerating within, always burning with lust. He had a fair in his youth and sought prostitutes as an adult. You still think I'm a virgin? And don't point at yourself. Sheng Qinghua was written the same way. Shen Qingzhu frowned, thinking carefully, then slapped his thigh. He turned and entered the carriage, but he abruptly heard Shen Qinghua howl again from outside. Shen Qingzhu grabbed the thing he was looking for and scurried back out. What is it? He yelled. Shen Qinghua was so terrified that his words no longer had any punctuation marks. When he went in, I felt something hairy brush on my neck, and when I raised my head, I saw was a mass of hair, and underneath it was a huge white face, and I couldn't see clearly. Fuck me! Shen Qingzhu lifted his head, and of course he couldn't see anything. So he sat down properly, opened the map in his hand, and raised an eyebrow. Wherever it is quite clever. Why so? It knows how to pick off the weak, and so chose the easier one to scare. He patted Shang Chinghua's shoulder again. No matter how terrifying the creature, you wrote it yourself. Why are you scared? I don't remember writing. Shang Chinghua trailed off. Cucumber bro, are you looking at the map? Take a good look. This is the map of the mainland. The entire mainland. Bailu Forest may be marked, but it's only the size of a dot. Look for yourself, Shen Qingzhu pointed to the lower portion of the map. Chengchong Mountain and Xiaohua Monastery were in the east. Tianyi Temple was in the center, and in the south was the territory that belonged to Huanhua Palace. The dot representing Bailu Forest just happened to fall on the border with the last, which had been outlined in diluted ink. Shang Qinghua suddenly understood. Bailu Forest was allotted to the Huanhua Palace and its sphere of influence. So right now we aren't walking in circles. We've just entered their protective array to prevent random passerbys from intruding and stirring up trouble. All the large sects had their own security spells. Take, for example, Chengchong Mountain's heavenly ascending stairs. Common folk who didn't understand the path would be stuck climbing 13,000 steps, unable to reach the peak, until they were nearly dead. They could only wait for the disciples defending the mountain to escort them back down. Thus, so long as they were trapped in this spell and without guidance, they would only keep running in circles. Sheng Qingzhu called out mentally, System, you there? After a while, with no response, he called again. Didn't you promise 24-hour online service? If you don't respond, I'll leave a negative review. Hello, the system has entered hibernation mode. You are speaking to the AI assistant. If you require service, please help yourself. Hibernation? Shen Qingzhu split his sides laughing. Now that he thought about it, these past few days, the system hadn't granted him any B points or various other bizarre newly activated point varieties. The system was disconnected from its central power source, Lo Binghua, the AI assistant explained. It is currently undergoing maintenance and updating itself in the background. The system will reactivate once it's been reconnected. We wish you a pleasant self-service experience. Thank you. The current version was already frustrating enough. Wouldn't a new version just straight up kill him in the future? No. Wait, the main point was, Lo Binghua was your central power source? The fuck? Shen Qingzhu had more questions, but he soon realized that the assistant only repeated the same thing over and over again. What kind of fucking AI assistant is this? Isn't it basically the QQ's automated response? And you have the nerve to call yourself an AI? QQ, there's a little footnote. A widely used Chinese instant messaging app, which also offers various entertainment services. When Shen Qingzhu nudged Sheng Qinghua, call your system. Is it still connected? Sheng Qinghua blinked. After a moment, he said, It says that it's undergoing maintenance. So not only was Lo Binghua the central power source of Shen Qingzhu's system, once he was disconnected, all the systems went down. One could have said that the matter was serious, but in truth, it wasn't that serious. It only meant that while Lo Binghua was in the abyss, Shen Qingzhu couldn't acquire B points. If he thought about it, this was good. If he couldn't acquire them, he also couldn't lose them, which meant all restrictions were off. Shen Qingchu was still consoling himself when he suddenly sensed the shrubbery by the side of the road rustling and moving as he snapped his fingers. "Come out!" he yelled. At his waist, Shuya left its sheath. Controlled by the orders from Shen Qingchu's sword shields, flipping and stabbing and slashing, the creature hidden in the shrubbery seemed to swim like a fish, more slippery than a loach, evading all its stabs. Suddenly, a blinding ray of light flashed before Shen Qingchu's eyes. The creature let out a shrill whine and leapt backwards several meters. The shrubbery had been slashed into shambles and was no longer capable of hiding anything, but that thing had long since escaped, and there was no further movements. He hadn't used any flashy techniques just now, right? Presumably, he just momentarily reflected the rays of sunlight. "It's afraid of light?" Shang Jinghua asked, bringing his head close to Shen Qingchu's. "Damn, it really is a female ghost, but I didn't write about one. I accidentally write about one." The two of them were about to discuss this when they heard the subtle sounds of footsteps. This person's footwork was excellent. If Shen Qingchu and Shang Jinghua had been any of the shallower cultivation, they definitely wouldn't have noticed them approaching. From the depths of the woods emerged a youth dressed in white. That youth held his sword unsheathed, his expression alert. On seeing his visitors, his face grew astonished, and then he quickly sheathed his sword to greet them. This junior sensed some unusual fluctuations around the barrier, and henceforth hurried over. "Not knowing immortal Shen and Shang were here, please excuse us for not coming to receive you." Shen Qingchu saw that he was quite handsome, but that he looked unfamiliar. "This young hero is?" he asked politely. The youth almost fell over. "There's a limit to how little dignity you can leave others," Shang Jinghua whispered in his ears. "That's Gong Yi Zhao." Gong Yi Zhao was a little depressed. The thought he had been the number one before Lu Binghe kicked him off on that place on the golden tablet. No matter what, he was still number two. His achievements were remarkable, and he had been the favorite for first place, so he had greeted each sect's high-ranking members alongside the old palace master. Therefore, Shen Qingchu's failure to recognize him came as a surprise. As expected, one's heroism is evident even in youth, Shen Qingchu said, offering praise. "I don't dare presume," Gong Yi Zhao demurred. "Still, for two peak lords to enter Huanhua Palace's territory unannounced, why didn't you inform us beforehand? We've neglected our seniors. Our hearts are burdened." He was truly treating Bailu Forest as his sect's territory. As a favored disciple on Huanhua Palace payroll, he had an obligation to discern the intentions of the two visiting peak lords from Chengchong's mountain sect. Why would they skulk around the border of his sect's sphere of influence? "We have no intention of visiting Huanhua Palace, and are only dealing with a small matter within Bailu Forest," Shen Qingchu said. By informing Gong Yi Zhao that they had come for business, but neglecting to say what the business was, he clearly indicated that he was unwilling to discuss it. In general, Gong Yi Zhao would be expected not to ask any further questions. After all, a junior interrogating his seniors about their activities would be improper. Gong Yi Zhao wavered for a moment. This junior doesn't know what matter the two seniors are seeing to, but he's unskilled. But maybe he's so bold as to request permission to come along to assist? If we refuse him now and let him leave, it won't be just one person coming to look for us later. Shen Qingchu's face held a smile, his lips barely moving, as he muttered to his teammate. "It's better if we bring him along. Anyways, he can fight." Shang Jinghua, who admittedly couldn't fight, muttered in response. "In the event he won't let us walk away with the sun moon dew flat mushroom, what will we do? If it grows in my garden, of course it belongs to me. If it grows along my fence, it also belongs to me. Don't say that I didn't warn you of Huanhua Palace's logic." "Are you an idiot?" Shen Qingchu asked. "When we find it, we'll take it and leave. He can't forcefully snatch it from us. If he goes back and tattles to his teacher, what's that? That's a problem for future us. We'll be long gone by then. Like we'd wait for them to catch us. What if our sects become hostile? Your life or diplomatic relations. You choose one." Shang Jinghua didn't hesitate in the slightest. "Let's bring him." Shen Qingju raised his hand and head and decisively said to Gong Yizhao, "Let's go." And so the hard work of driving was handed to the junior. "Senior Shen, there's something this junior doesn't understand," Gong Yizhao said curiously as he was maneuvering the reins. "Please speak," said Shen Qingju. "With Senior's level of cultivation, he would need only a moment to break our sex protective array, and he could do so without anyone knowing better. Why did you admit such a large spiritual fluctuation?" "That fluctuation wasn't my attempt to break the spell," Shen Qingju said. "It occurred while I fought a mysterious demonic creature." "A mysterious demonic creature?" In truth, it was hard to tell if it was demonic, but it had an evil appearance unlike that of a normal creature from our realm. Gong Yizhao frowned. "There are human settlements within a 5 kilometers radius from Bailu Forest, but we've never heard of any demonic attacks. Even fierce beasts are uncommon." "Then what exactly was that?" Shen Qingju muttered to himself. It had loose hair draped over its head and an oddly flexible skeleton and a bloated face like that of a starved, drowned corpse. "No matter what it was, it's best if it doesn't appear again," Gong Yizhao said. "If it does, the two seniors need not to trouble themselves and can leave it to this junior." The respect within those words wasn't a pretense. Though Gong Yizhao's understanding of his senior who carried the Shuya sword was limited, and they'd only met once or twice from afar during the last Immortal Alliance conference, Shen Qingchu's personal disciple had surpassed Gong Yizhao to secure the top rank. That same disciple had also saved quite a few of Huanhua Palace's disciples, and therefore Gong Yizhao felt no lack of reverence for him. Shen Qingchu took in that proper bearing, which lacked not the slightest bit of appropriate humility. Moreover, Gong Yizhao's appearance was that of the same type of Lo Binghe's, gentle and emotional, a handsome youth with a smile in his eyes. It was horribly difficult not to be reminded of Lo Binghua, his unblackened, lovable disciple. It was also horribly difficult not to come away with a favorable impression of the boy. With Gong Yizhao's guidance, the three quickly broke through Huanhua Palace's protective array and pinpointed their location. The original novel had not described the place where the sun moon dew mushroom grew in much detail, just briefly mentioned that it was in some stone cave covered by a dense greenery. Merely recalling this sliver of content had cost Sheng Qinghua half of his soul. In defense, this mushroom wasn't reserved for Lo Binghua, rather it was supposed to be for one of his opponents. It was precisely because of this that Shen Qingchu dared to seek it for himself. If it were a thing that affected the main plotline, or if it was some mystical flower or herb meant to provide one of Lo Binghe's power-ups, he wouldn't have had the guts to try and steal it. Trying to snatch resources from the male liege didn't lead to the kind of sweet and forgiving conclusion you got when you lost a handful of rice for trying to swipe a chicken. But since they were both villains, he figured it should be fine if they reappropriated it. Fortunately, though Bailu Forest was large, there was only one stone cave. This saved them quite a bit of trouble. Shen Qingchu snapped his fingers, and a bright yellow flame sprang into life at his fingertips. With a flick, the flame swam off into the depths of the damp, pitch-dark cave. A bright tail leisurely swishing behind it illuminated the path before them. At first, the stone path was wide enough for 3 people to walk shoulder to shoulder, but the further they went, the narrower it became, until they had to turn sideways to get through. It twisted this way and that, like the coiled intestines of some giant beast. The lighting was poor. Even Shen Qingchu's ball of flame flickered between bright and dim. He flicked out a few more, and the balls of fire chased each other around. Gong Yizhao took up the rear. Shen Qinghua had wanted to wait outside the cave, but Shen Qingchu had dragged him in. Maybe he was scared or something, because he touched Shen Qingchu's arm from time to time, making goosebumps run down it whenever he did. Finally, Shen Qingchu couldn't take it anymore. Because they were with an interloper, he lowered his voice to hiss, "Can you stop pinching me?" There was no reply, but at least the touches stopped. and Shen Qingchu continued to grope his way forward, but Shang Qinghua suddenly kicked him in the calf. Shen Qingchu couldn't help but letting out a fuck slip from his mouth. Shang Qinghua's voice sounded from far behind. Shen Shishong? What did you say? His voice echoed through the winding corridor like it had been stretched by the distance. It seemed that Shen Qingchu had been unconsciously walking faster and faster while Shang Qinghua had dawdled, meaning Gong Yizhao, who was taking up the rear, was also unable to pick up the pace. He'd already left the other two quite a ways behind, but if Shang Qinghua hadn't been touching his arm, then who had? Or in other words, what has been touching his arm? Shen Qingchu ground to a halt. With a blank expression on his face, he patted his arm, attempting to brush off the goosebumps. A few balls of flames were still suspended in midair, burning faintly. The enemy's in the dark, I'm in the light. With a flip of his left hand, Shen Qingchu silently produced 2 paper talismans from his sleeve, while in his right hand slowly withdrew Shuya. The sword grew increasingly bright, but the only thing in front of him and behind him was dark stone, which gave off a damp, rank odor. Then, Shen Qingchu realized that when something had collided with his calf a half second before, it hadn't felt like a kick from a foot. Rather, it had been more like a headbutt. Shen Qingchu jerked his head down, and his gaze met that of a deathly pale and bloated face on the ground. Shen Qingchu threw his talisman at the face, but in an instant the narrow stone pathway lit up with bursts of fire and flashes of lightning. He wanted to draw his sword, but he hadn't realized that the space was too narrow. Before he even drew it halfway out of its sheath, his right arm knocked against the wall of the tunnel, and the hilt of his sword hit the stone with a clang. The thing on the ground was soft and boneless, slithering back and forth like a giant snake. It was more agile than Shen Qingchu, and evaded his attack so quickly that, at this point-blank range, the talismans failed to hit it. In the short time Shen Qingchu had lost attempting to draw his sword, it had already reversed course with a swish and slithered away, heading towards the direction of Shang Qinghua and Gong Yizhao. "Watch out," he yelled. "There's something heading your way." At this, Shang Qinghua immediately turned and yelled, "Young hero, quick, let's switch places." He worked in logistics. How could he be the front lines of an assault? Gong Yizhao tried to do as instructed, but the pathway was already narrow enough to raise the hair on one's nape. There was only enough space for one person to walk, with a fist with a margin beside. He couldn't get around at all. Shen Qingchu yelled again, "On the ground, look at on the ground, it's crawling on the ground." When Shang Qinghua turned his head back, he saw a snake man slithering towards them. He made a swift decision and collapsed on the spot. Gong Yizhao had never seen such an eerie monster either, and he froze for a moment, but upon seeing Shang Qinghua's sudden collapse, his face twitched. "My apologies," he cried as he leapt over Shang Qinghua. Although it was done in an unsightly way, the logistics guy and the vanguard finally, at last, managed to switch places. "Don't draw your sword," Shen Qingchu yelled again. Before he could finish the word sword, Gong Yizhao had carelessly tried to draw. Of course, he ended up suffering the same disastrous consequences. His hilt hit the sword wall before the sword was halfway out. The stone wall before the sword was halfway out. Shen Qingchu finally arrived, holding his own blade. "Ah, idiot," he blurted out. Gong Yizhao was rather aggrieved. In truth, Shen Qingchu also knew that the issue was that the boy's reflexes were too fast, leading for him to move before he finished listening. Anyone else would have done the same, but in the past, on the few occasions Shen Qingchu had partnered with Lo Binghe, his disciple had always understood exactly what Shen Qingchu wanted, and he had always responded perfectly without his master needing to offer a single word of clarification. The contrast was clear as day, and Shen Qingchu couldn't have helped but miss the benefits and ease of working with Lo Binghe had afforded him. The stone corridor meandered back and forth, and moreover it was dark, which made it for an extremely advantageous environment for that thing to move around. Shen Qingchu drew out another handful of talismans, but the thing had already slithered away and disappeared. "Senior Shen, that snake, was that the demonic creature you encountered in Bailu Forest?" Gong Yizhao asked in disbelief. "It was," said Shen Qingzhu. I still don't understand how that thing managed to escape our pincer attack. By squeezing past me, expression unchanging, Sheng Qinghua got up from the ground and patted dust from his robes. Gong Yizhao pointedly said nothing. Let's go, said Shen Qingzhu. This time, stay close to me. His reminder wasn't necessary. This time, even on the threat of death, Sheng Qinghua refused to stray more than an arm's length away from him. After a dizzying number of turns and twists, the three finally made their way out of the stone corridor deeply into the belly of the cave. They suddenly came upon a wide cavern. Before, Shen Qingzhu hadn't really understood how anything called the sun moon dew mushroom could be found in the depths of a cave, which presumably had neither sunlight nor moonlight. The name clearly indicated that a thing that gathered spiritual energy from nature and from the essence of the sun and moon. So how could it grow in this place? Now he finally got it. As it turned out, the cavern's highest point, a giant opening in the ceiling, yawned up towards the sky. Sun and moonlight fell through the opening like a spotlight to hit a single point in the heart of the underground lake. A little mound of soil surrounded by glittering water was naturally a hallowed location with excellent feng shui. And it was where the sun moon dew mushroom grew. The dew lake, Sheng Qinghua said with conviction. I'm certain. Having received confirmation, Shen Qingzhu let out a sigh of relief. They had found the right place. The lake before them was filled with no ordinary water, but with unsullied morning dew. This unsullied water, collected from the morning dew, brimming with spiritual energy, and nourished the sun and moon dew mushroom. After the mushrooms matured, the mycelia sunk into the water and soil to nourish the dew water in return. And this way, the spiritual energy circled back and forth undiminished, never to be exhausted. Admiring the beautiful scene, Gong Yizhao finally understood the Peak Lord's objective, but he still found it a bit odd. Qingchong Mountain was a major sect that produced mystical herbs and elixirs. Surely they gathered a number of rare and treasured flowers every day. Though this mushroom was scarce and precious, it didn't look like something that could grant immortality, nor a breakthrough to ascension. So how did it merit two Peak Lords personally taking a long journey to collect it? Meanwhile, Shen Qingzhu's eyes were fixed solely on the small, white, fleshy pods in the center of the lake. With a sweep of his sleeves, he stepped resolutely into the water. After a few dozen steps, the dew water reached his waist, neither warm nor cold, soaking his skin. It felt as if it could soak right through into the heart. Though these mushrooms were small and looked just like bean sprouts, once they were planted somewhere with excellent feng shui and a bounty of spiritual energy, and nurtured according to plan. Shen Qingzhu hesitated at the sight of the dozen or so white mushrooms growing on the little dirt mound, small and tender. Come to think of it, these mushrooms were a natural wonder. To harvest every last one seemed a bit immoral. But on second thought, if he didn't pick them all now, another villain would pick them later, which would then be even more immoral. And if they messed up and destroyed one, it would be good to have a few extra as a backup, just to be absolutely safe. Insurance was a critical importance. When the last mushroom was in his hand, Shen Qingzhu suddenly heard the sound of a sword being drawn behind him before he could properly stow it. When he turned around, Gong Yizhao had his sword in hand and he was staring straight at Shen Qingzhu. At first, Shen Qingzhu thought Gong Yizhao was protesting his slapdash approach to harvesting, but Sheng Qinghua was in the same stance. It was then he saw something. He knew something had gone wrong, and he held his breath. Suddenly, something long and large leapt out of the surface of the lake. It looked like a giant fish, and it pounced straight towards Shen Qingzhu. A pale and deadened face flew right at him, and it was that thing that had been following them since they reached the forest. At the same time, Gong Yizhao finished forming his sword seal, and his sword flew at the thing like a bolt of lightning. But once that thing missed Shen Qingzhu, it sank into the lake and didn't resurface, stirring up a long, settled silt at the bottom until the water became turbid and murky. Gong Yizhao recalled his sword. Senior Shen, come back to the shore, quick! But Shen Qingchu smiled. Don't panic. I want to go fishing. He stood in place without moving, and he slowly extracted a talisman from his robe. A single talisman probably isn't, Gong Yishao started. Before enough could leave his mouth, Shen Qingchu rubbed the talisman like he would rub a bill, and the single talisman abruptly became an entire stack. Holding the stack of talisman, Shen Qingchu thrust his fist into the water. A chain of booms followed. Words are hard, I'm sorry. The surface of the lake exploded, sending up over 12 sprays of water into the air, each several meters tall. This explosion also threw the snake man hiding on the lake bottom into the air. It was tossed up high before crashing heavily onto the ground by Sheng Chinghua's feet. Shen Qingchu dripped his way back to shore. After being given a meaningful look, Gong Yizhao used the hilt of his sword to turn the creature over. Once it had been, all three were horror-struck. After a long time, Shen Qingchu turned to look at Sheng Qinghua. What is this? Sheng Qinghua squeezed out 3 words. I don't know. He really didn't. This creature was vaguely human-like. It had a full head of long hair, but it seemed to be entirely composed of cartilage. Its skin was rough and hard, and covered in patches of scales here and there, like a python half scraped of his scales. Though Shen Qingchu had originally thought it was a female ghost, upon taking a closer look at its face, though it was bloated, he could faintly discern that it was that of a man. Sheng Qinghua gave Shen Qingchu a questioning look. Did I? He asked, meaning, did I write about this kind of thing? Shen Qingchu frowned. I don't think so. If the original novel had given this thing more than 10 words of description, there was no way he wouldn't have remembered. The two looked hopefully at Gong Yizhao. Gong Yizhao did not recognize it either, and he felt a bit awkward. If the two masters cannot recognize this creature, it's even more unfamiliar to this junior. Let me say something, Sheng Qinghua said suddenly. What if this isn't this creature's natural form? That had made sense. It was so grotesque, and it certainly didn't seem like a normal creature, but rather a deformed specimen or a crossbreed. Punishment from the heavens, a curse, or a cultivator who failed to cultivate a forbidden technique, Shen Qingchu muttered. All 3 of those events could indeed result in this kind of monster, said Gong Yizhao. The snake man on the ground seemed to be irritated by the word monster, and his tail-like back half furiously slapped the ground. Sheng Qinghua hurriedly dodged away. Young hero Gong Yi, young master Gong Yi, don't say such irresponsible things. It seems like it can understand us. Use a different word. A different word! The creature's gaze remained fixed on Shen Qingchu's sleeve. At that moment, Shen Qingchu noticed that, although this creature looked sinister and terrifying enough to make one retch, the eyes gazing through its current of tangled hair were incomparably clear, just like the water of the dew lake. He suddenly had a realization. No wonder it attacked us. Look, he pointed, its eyes. They probably look like that because it drinks the unsullied morning dew every day. Now look at its scales. There's lichen growing between the cracks, green with a bit of red, the exact same kind that grows on the stone walls. It's been visiting this cave for a long time. Perhaps it's been living off the spiritual dew within the dew lake. And if the sun-moon dew mushroom was picked, the main force driving the circulation of spiritual energy in this lake would be destroyed. The spiritual energy in the dew lake would gradually be depleted, and eventually it would be a pool of mere wastewater. It might even dry up completely. That was why this creature had been following them, waiting for a chance to attack. But, Senior Shen, if that monster has been living off the dew water, wouldn't it be better to eat them directly? Gong Yizhao asked. Why did it never pick up the mushrooms for itself? When we were in Bailu Forest, it kept obstructing us, said Shen Qingchu. At first it only retreated after it was burned by the sunlight reflecting off my sword blade. Perhaps it can't stand light, especially light from the sun and moon, so it can only move within the shade of the forest, inside caves and beneath the water. He pointed at the shaft of light beaming down from the cave's domed ceiling. The sun moon dew mushrooms are steeped in sunlight and moonlight and all day and night. Of course it couldn't approach them. As confirmation, he withdrew a tender mushroom and swung it back and forth. As expected, the snake man's eyes lit up, and it urgently craned its neck towards it, bearing a mouthful of dense white teeth. Gong Yizhao prodded it with the hilt of his sword and flipped it over again. The snake man strained, struggling and wriggling on the ground, but it couldn't turn back over. Gong Yizhao turned his sword point down, seemingly prepared to stab it through. Wait, Shen Qingchu said hurriedly. As expected, Gong Yizhao stopped. Senior? He asked in confusion. You said before that the common people within a several-kilometer radius of Bailu Forest has never suffered demonic attacks. Shen Qingchu asked tactfully. Yes. Then that means this creature has never done anything malicious. There's no need to exterminate it. Moreover, all it's ever done has been to drink the dew water in this cave. We were the ones who intruded and disturbed it. Since his senior had spoken, of course Gong Yizhao had to obey. Shen Qingchu spoke true. If this monster really had killed or harmed humans, Huanhua Palace would have discovered and eradicated it long ago. It was precisely because it had never done any harm that it had not yet been killed. Therefore, Gong Yizhao sheathed his swords and observed Shen Qingchu looking at the creature on the ground with a benevolent gaze. Gong Yizhao believed that Shen Qingchu was cut from the same cloth as the masters from Zhaohua Monastery, who believed in mercy and charity. He could never have guessed that Shen Qingchu's interest in such a strange creature was equivalent to the average Zhongdine reader's interest in the hundreds of flower-like maidens, each more beautiful than the last. Even after they left the depths of the cave, no one noticed that the snake man strenuously struggling on the ground had stopped writhing and was instead ever so slightly shivering. Pressed under its deformed body was a tiny, thin sun moon dew mushroom sprout, and that pair of incongruously bright eyes, a raging fire began to burn. After exiting Bailu Forest, Gong Yizhao invited the two peak lords to visit Huanhua Palace. He could also notify the old palace master. Shen Qingchu declined. After all, we've already enjoyed your assistance. It would be impolite to trouble you further. You're joking? Go to the Huanhua Palace? For what? A mushroom viewing party? What if your higher-ups take things too seriously and insist on discussing property rights? Realizing that Gong Yizhao still wanted to detain them, Cheng Qinghua took the lead. Young here, Gong Yi. Let's dispense with courtesy today. We can visit properly next time. If you come to Chengchong Mountain in the future, you can visit Qingjing Peak. Your senior Shen will definitely look after you well. Shen Qingchu gave him a look. Shen Qinghua immediately shut up. Shen Qingchu finally recovered his expression and smiled. As Sheng Shidi said, Qingjing Peak awaits your arrival. Gong Yizhao knew that, just like its name, the people of Qingjing Peak were fond of peace and quiet and didn't like to be disturbed by guests. He wasn't sure if these were just words of courtesy, but he smiled either way. I'll remember Senior Shen's words, he said. I may indeed have the chance to disturb you in the future. When the time comes, to whom should I send the message announcing my arrival? Without a second thought, Shen Qingchu said, Give it to my disciple, Lo Binghuo. After he spoke, everyone fell silent. The atmosphere turned a bit odd. Though he was struck for a moment, Shen Qingchu slowly flapped his fan twice and stiffly continued, His Shi Shong. Mingfen. Gong Yizhao's heart filled with conflicted feelings. Rumor had it that after the peak lord of Qingjing Peak lost his beloved disciple at the Immortal Alliance conference, he had for a time fallen into an inconsolable heartbreak. Being out of his mind with grief, the man had before him right now didn't even seem like one who had accepted that Lo Binghuo was really gone. Perhaps Shen Qingchu hadn't come here primarily to pick the mushrooms, but rather to take his mind off things so he could briefly forget Lo Binghuo's existence. Otherwise, why would two peak lords pursue this task in person? Senior Sheng must have come to supervise Senior Shen and make sure that he didn't do anything rash. Then, after Shen Qingchu had forced himself to smile this whole trip, Gong Yizhao had managed to poke a sore spot and stir up a melancholy thoughts. As expected, what a deep master and disciple bond. Until they parted ways, ways, Gong Yizhao kept looking back at Shen Qingchu every 10 steps, his gaze a tangled mix of awkwardness, sympathy, sorrow, and admiration. Shen Qingchu was a bit creeped out by his gaze. It had only been a slip of the tongue. What stories was Gong Yizhao making up in that head of his? It's true, Shen Qinghua sighed when they were again alone. It's actually true. Shen Qingchu gave him a kick that was neither heavy nor light. What's true? I've been watching you for a while, and I have something to say. Besides, keeping it in is uncomfortable, said Shen Qinghua. Cucumber bro, did you really see Lo Binghe as an apple of your eye? Did you adore him as your darling baby and disciple? He went on, analyzing the evidence piece by piece. I heard your Qingjing Peak disciples say that ever since returning from the Immortal Alliance conference, Shen Shishong has been out of his mind with grief, his thoughts wandering all over the place. Time after time you called Lu Binghe's name and you stand in front of that sword mound and sigh in sorrow. I didn't believe it, but just now I finally witnessed it with my own eyes. Cucumber bro, I never really thought that you were this sort of person. Fuck! Out of your mind again? Is this phrase going to be the eternal stain on my lifetime of hard work? My disciples all also supposedly walk the path of scholarly detachment. When did they turn into such gossip, spreading this sort of nonsense everywhere? What are you doing with your master's image? Shen Qinghua continued to dig his own grave. Cucumber bro, can I ask, how did you see Lo Binghe? I remember you were one of his fans, right? You roasted a huge number of the characters I wrote, but even so, you never roasted him. To you, is he a character, or is he a chill ran down Shen Qingchu's back? This bizarre interrogation from Great Master Airplane shooting towards the sky was identical in tone to high school girls gossiping in the dorms after lights out. Tell me, do you have a crush on... No, what are you talking about? Dodging the question? Don't be shy. I hate you. Go to bed. Lightning from the 9 heavens! Shen Qinghua was in fact innocent. He was honestly asking and interested in discussing this matter. It was Shen Qingchu who was overthinking the skeletons in the closet. Why aren't we moving? Shen Qingchu snapped, interrupting him. Shen Qinghua stared. What? Shen Qingchu stared back and shoved the reins into his hand. Gong Yizhao left, so we need a driver. Why haven't you driven even once? Shen Qinghua asked suspiciously. You should be considerate towards the poisoned invalid. Invalid my ass, thought Shen Qinghua, who was happily fighting monsters and blowing up spiritual lakes just now. Have some dignity! Shen Qingchu relaxed within the carriage and shook out his sleeves. There were still 5 years before Lo Binghe would leave the endless abyss and return to the human realm. If nothing went wrong, the mushrooms they have just harvested would definitely be enough to save Shen Qingchu's life. However, he had forgotten the fundamental stupidity of proud immortal Demon Wei. If nothing went wrong at such a crucial juncture in the novel's storyline, that meant it wasn't exciting enough. And at the end of the book, there is a little bonus gallery image, a bonus image gallery, of course, so we can look through that. So, there's Shen Qingchu and Lo Binghe, little young Lo Binghe. Yu Qingyan and Lu Qingyi. Honestly, I love how pretty they all look. Ming Fan and Ning Yingying. And that's all that it's in this one. So we can I'll put them up. So anyways, that is the end of book 1 for the Scum Villain Self-Saving System. So yay. Anyways, we'll see you in the next book and chapter. Goodbye.